It happened in the most unassuming way, an idle moment that changed everything. I had picked up his phone, a harmless gesture we'd done countless times before. "Can you unlock it?" I had asked, needing to use his flashlight to peer under the couch for a missing earring. He obliged without hesitation, swiping his thumb across the screen and handing it back. I don't know what made me linger. Maybe it was the way his phone vibrated softly in my hand, a notification slipping across the screen. A message from someone named Melissa, one I didn't recognize. My heart gave a slight flutter, but I brushed it off. Could be a work contact, I reasoned. Then, as I went to close the app, I accidentally swiped left, opening the gallery instead. And there it was. The thumbnail was small, innocent almost, but something about it stopped me. A video. My fingers hovered, and before I could stop myself, I tapped it. The screen expanded and sound filled the room. Laughter, voices, his voice. My breath caught as the scene unfolded. There he was, my husband, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, holding a glass of champagne in one hand and a woman in the other. Her face was unfamiliar, framed by soft waves of dark hair. Her dress shimmered under dim lights, her arm casually draped around his waist. They were too close, closer than mere friends. He turned toward her, saying something I couldn't hear over the chatter. And then he laughed, pulling her into a brief but intimate embrace. The video was only 15 seconds long, but it felt like an eternity. I closed the phone quickly, my heart pounding in my chest as if I had been the one caught doing something wrong. My throat tightened, bow rising. I sat frozen, the edges of the room seeming to blur as my mind scrambled to make sense of what I had just seen. When he walked back into the room, I could barely look at him. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing in concern. I hesitated, biting my lip so hard it nearly bled. "Who's the woman in the video?" My voice was steadier than I expected, even as my insides twisted in knots. He blinked, his expression momentarily blank, and then he smiled, too quickly, too smoothly. "Oh, that's from an old party. It's nothing really. Just some people from work." "An old party?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. "When?" He hesitated, and in that pause, something cracked in me. "A couple of months ago, maybe? I can't remember exactly." "Why? What's the big deal?" "The big deal." I wanted to scream at him, to throw the phone across the room and demand the truth. But instead I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "No reason. Just curious." I excused myself, locking the bathroom door behind me. My hands shook as I replayed the video, this time paying closer attention. My stomach churned when I saw the timestamp. 2 weeks ago. A night I remembered all too well, because he'd told me he was staying late at work to finish a project. I had made him dinner that night, setting it aside in the fridge when he texted me. "Don't wait up. I'll be home late." I stared at the date, the sinking feeling in my chest deepening. My mind raced, piecing together the fragmented puzzle. I needed more proof, answers, something. That's when I thought of Ryan, his closest friend at the office. The one who always had an alibi ready when my husband needed one. I texted Ryan casually, asking how work had gone that night. His reply was almost instant. "Oh yeah, we were swamped. Didn't leave the office till after midnight." I stared at the screen, bow rising in my throat. "Habla ton lit." My husband hadn't been at the office that night. He had been at a party, laughing, drinking, and holding another woman. Confronting him wasn't an option, not yet. I needed to be sure, to gather every piece of evidence before I let the storm loose. For the next week, I played the part of the oblivious wife, smiling, laughing, pretending nothing had changed while my heart shattered a little more every day. At night, when he slept beside me, I would scroll through his messages, scanning for anything incriminating. It was like a second life I had created, one of suspicion and secrets. I found nothing, no texts, no calls, no photos. But I couldn't shake the image of that video, or the way he had looked at her. The truth was out there, lurking in the shadows of our life, and I was determined to find it. Over the next several days, I became a shadow in my own life, silently observing every move he made, every word he spoke, analyzing it all for cracks. He was calm, too calm, like someone who had rehearsed his lines, who knew exactly what to say to keep me pacified. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. how often he glanced at his phone, the way he turned the screen away from me when he sat on the couch, the faint trace of a smile that played on his lips when he thought I wasn't watching. I didn't confront him outright. Instead, I probed, asking seemingly innocent questions. How's Ryan doing? I'd ask casually over breakfast. You guys been busy at work? He answered without hesitation, like a seasoned liar. Yeah, we've got a ton of deadlines coming up. It's been nonstop. His tone was so natural, so believable, that I almost second-guessed myself, almost. But the video remained burned into my mind, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. I replayed it late at night, scrutinizing every detail. The way he leaned into her. The way she smiled up at him. I even started looking for her. This unknown woman, who had become the center of my obsession. I scanned his social media, his tagged photos, his friends list. Nothing. She was a ghost, someone who had slipped into his life and out of mine without leaving a trace. One evening, when he left his phone unattended on the kitchen counter, I seized the opportunity. My hands trembled as I opened his recent calls, scrolling through the list. Most of the names were familiar, his co-workers, his brother, me. But there was one that stood out, a number with no name attached. It had appeared multiple times over the past month, often late at night, or during the hours he claimed to be at work. I copied the number into my phone, heart pounding. I didn't recognize it, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that it belonged to her. I thought about calling it right then and there, but fear held me back. What if she answered? What would I even say? Instead, I saved the number and decided to dig deeper. The next day, while he was at work, or wherever he actually went, I called a friend of mine who worked in IT. Can you help me trace a number? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Is everything okay? She asked. I forced a laugh. Yeah, it's nothing serious. Just a little personal project. After some convincing, she agreed. Hours later, she texted me the results. The number belonged to a woman named Lauren. No last name, just a first. My chest tightened as I stared at the name. Lauren. It was simple, unassuming, yet it felt like a dagger in my heart. Who was she? Why was she calling my husband? And more importantly, why was he calling her? I spent the rest of the day in a haze, barely able to focus on anything else. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him? Should I call her? Every option felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. By the time he came home that evening, I had decided to play it cool, to wait for the right moment to strike. How was work? I asked, forcing a smile as he set his bag down. Exhausting, he replied, running a hand through his hair. I could really use a drink. He kissed me on the cheek, his touch warm and familiar, and for a moment, I almost believed the lie. Almost. That night, as he showered, I went through his phone again, this time checking his calendar. He had an upcoming meeting scheduled for Friday evening, conveniently during the hours I had planned to visit my sister. My stomach churned. Was it a coincidence? Or was he using my absence to meet her? I canceled my plans with my sister, feigning a headache, and instead waited. Friday evening came. And as soon as he left, I followed him. My heart raced as I tailed his car through the city, staying a safe distance behind. He stopped at a small, dimly lit restaurant on the outskirts of town. I parked a block away, and watched as he stepped inside. Minutes later, she arrived. Lauren, the woman from the video. My breath caught as I saw them embrace, her hand lingering on his arm. They didn't look like co-workers or casual acquaintances. They looked like lovers. I sat frozen in my car, watching as they laughed and talked through the restaurant window. My mind raced, torn between barging in and confronting them, or driving away, and pretending I had never seen it. But I couldn't look away. I needed to see it, to feel the full weight of his betrayal, no matter how much it hurt. When they left the restaurant, I followed them again, this time to a nearby hotel. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. This was it. The truth I had been searching for. He wasn't working late. He wasn't with Ryan. He was here with her. I didn't confront him that night. I drove home, numb and hollow, replaying the events in my mind. When he walked through the door hours later, he looked surprised to see me awake. Couldn't sleep, I said simply, hiding the storm brewing inside me. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The days that followed were surreal, a blur of emotions that left me feeling like I was floating outside my own body. I alternated between heartbreak and rage, helplessness and resolve. Each time I saw his face, every moment we shared the same space, I felt the weight of the lie pressing down on me, threatening to suffocate me. Yet I didn't let him see it. I smiled when I had to, laughed at his jokes, cooked his meals, and played the role of the unsuspecting wife to perfection. But inside I was unraveling, and he didn't even notice. The lawyer I had contacted was kind but firm. "Before we proceed," she said during our first meeting, "you need to gather as much evidence as you can. Videos, photos, texts. Anything that proves what's happening. It will make all the difference if this goes to court." Her words made my stomach churn. As much as I hated the idea of living in this nightmare even a moment longer, I knew she was right. I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. So I started keeping records. Every time he left the house, I took note of the time. Every call or text from an unknown number, I wrote it down. I even bought a small recording device, slipping it into his bag one night while he was in the shower. I hated myself for it. Hated what this situation had turned me into, but I told myself it was necessary. I needed the truth. The device paid off sooner than I expected. A few days later, I retrieved it from his bag while he slept, my hands trembling as I plugged it into my laptop. The playback was scratchy at first, filled with muffled background noise. But then I heard his voice, low and soft, followed by hers. "Lauren." My heart clenched as I listened to them talk, their words laced with a familiarity that cut deeper than any blade. They talked about the restaurant, the hotel, plans for the weekend. They even joked about how easy it was to fool me. I had to pause the recording, my vision blurring with tears. This was my life now, reduced to spying on my own husband and listening to his whispered lies. Part of me wanted to confront him right then, to throw the evidence in his face and demand an explanation. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I forwarded the recording to my lawyer, her reply coming within minutes. "This is good," she wrote. "It's exactly what we need." That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling as he slept soundly. How could he be so calm, so at peace, knowing what he was doing? I thought about the years we had spent together, the life we had built. Every memory felt tainted now. Every happy moment a cruel reminder of what I was losing. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let him win. He had taken so much from me already, my trust, my dignity, my sense of security, but he wouldn't take my future. The next step was finding Lauren. I had her number, but I needed more. Who was she? Where did she live? What did she want from my husband? My lawyer suggested hiring a private investigator, someone who could dig up the answers I couldn't find on my own. Felt extreme, almost absurd, but I agreed. If I was going to confront him, I needed to be armed with the whole truth. The investigator worked quickly, and within a week, I had a file in my hands. Lauren was in her early 30s, single, and worked in marketing at a firm downtown. She had no criminal record, no history of scandal or drama. On the surface, she seemed ordinary, unremarkable even. But the photos told a different story. There she was, walking arm in arm with my husband, laughing with him in the park, kissing him in the doorway of her apartment. Each image was like a knife to the heart, but I didn't look away. I needed to see it, to feel the full weight of his betrayal. Armed with the photos, the recordings, and a growing resolve, I decided it was time. No more waiting, no more pretending. I was going to confront him, not just for my own sake, but because I deserved answers. I deserved to hear the truth from his lips, no matter how painful it might be. The confrontation happened on a Saturday afternoon, a day we usually spent together running errands or relaxing at home. I waited until he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I stood in the doorway, the file clutched in my hands, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He looked up, startled by my tone. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his phone aside. I walked over, dropping the file onto the coffee table in front of him. "This," I said simply. He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the file and back to me. "What is it?" "Open it," I said, crossing my arms. He did, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through the photos. His face paled, his eyes widening with each page. By the time he reached the recordings, he looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "I can explain," he stammered. "Can you?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Can you explain the video I found on your phone? Or the photos? Or the recordings of you and Lauren laughing about how easy it is to lie to me?" He stood, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Please," he pleaded. "It's not what it looks like. Don't insult me," I snapped. "I've spent weeks piecing this together. Weeks questioning everything I thought I knew about you. Don't you dare tell me it's not what it looks like." He slumped back onto the couch, his head in his hands. For the first time he looked defeated, like the weight of his actions was finally sinking in. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen?" I demanded. "The affair? The lies? The betrayal?" He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "I was unhappy," he said, his voice breaking. "We've been drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Lauren. She was a distraction, a way to feel something again." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected many things, but hearing him admit it out loud was worse than I could have imagined. "So you chose her," I said, my voice shaking. "You chose to destroy our marriage instead of talking to me. Instead of trying to fix what was wrong." "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You've succeeded anyway." I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out, and now it was up to me to decide what came next. I drove aimlessly for hours, the silence in the car broken only by the occasional sound of my breath hitching as I tried to hold back tears. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, but also an odd sense of relief. The weight I had been carrying for weeks was finally lifted. I wasn't imagining things, wasn't overthinking, wasn't crazy. The truth was uglier than I ever could have expected. But it was real, and I could finally stop questioning my own sanity. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a small coffee shop. The kind I used to frequent before life became a never-ending series of responsibilities. The smell of freshly brewed coffee greeted me as I stepped inside, and for a brief moment, it felt like stepping into another life. One where my world wasn't falling apart. I ordered a cappuccino and found a seat in the corner, away from the few other patrons. I needed space to think, to plan. What now? The question hung heavy in the air, taunting me. I had the proof. I had his admission. My lawyer was ready to move forward with the divorce, but the idea of dismantling our life piece by piece filled me with dread. Every decision felt monumental, every step a potential misstep. I had spent years building a life with him, trusting him, loving him. How do you walk away from all of that? And yet, how could I stay? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos of us. Vacations, family gatherings, silly selfies we used to take when things were good. Each image felt like a ghost, a reminder of a time when I believed in us, when I thought he was as committed to me as I was to him. I found myself searching for signs, little clues I might have missed. Was the distance in his eyes already there? Was the laughter forced? Or was it all genuine until it wasn't? My coffee grew cold as I sat there, lost in thought. Eventually, I forced myself to move. Sitting in that coffee shop forever wouldn't solve anything. I needed to take action, to figure out what my next step would be. As much as I hated the thought of returning to the house, I knew I had to. I couldn't avoid him forever, no matter how much I wanted to. When I got home, the house was quiet, almost eerily so. His car was still in the driveway, but the lights were off, and for a moment I wondered if he had left. Part of me hoped he had, that I wouldn't have to face him again. But as I stepped inside, I saw him sitting in the dimly lit living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up when he heard me, his eyes red and tired. "You came back," he said softly, his voice filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. "I came back to pack a bag," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm staying with a friend for a while." He stood, setting the glass down on the table. "Please don't do this," he pleaded. "We can fix this. I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "You should have thought of that before," I said. "Before Lauren. Before the lies. Before you threw everything we had away. I was stupid, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to handle things. I felt lost. But I never stopped loving you. Love. I shot back, my anger rising. Don't you dare talk to me about love. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't make you feel small and broken. He reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. I can't do this, I said. I can't be here in this house pretending everything is okay when it's not. You've destroyed my trust, and without that, what do we even have? Please, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. Just give me a chance. One chance to prove to you that I can be better, that I can make this right. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how absurd he sounded. But instead I just stood there, staring at the man I had once thought I would spend the rest of my life with. He looked so small, so broken, and for a brief moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I thought of Lauren. Of the video. Of the nights I spent crying while he was with her. And the sympathy vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. You had your chance, I said finally. And you wasted it. I turned and walked up the stairs, ignoring the sound of his voice calling after me. In the bedroom I grabbed a suitcase and began throwing clothes into it, not caring whether they matched or were neatly folded. I just needed to get out of there. The house felt suffocating, filled with memories that now felt like lies. As I zipped up the suitcase I paused, glancing around the room. This had been our sanctuary, the place where we laughed and loved and planned our future. Now it was just a room, a collection of furniture and walls that meant nothing. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. There would be time to grieve later. When I came back downstairs he was still standing in the living room, his shoulders slumped, his hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything as I walked past him and I didn't look back. I loaded my suitcase into the car, started the engine and drove away. That night I stayed at a friend's house, someone who had always been there for me, even when I didn't think I needed anyone. She listened as I poured out the whole story, her face a mix of shock and anger. You don't deserve this, she said firmly. You deserve so much better. Her words were kind, but they didn't erase the pain. Nothing could. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had ended up here. But as the hours passed I realized something. I might not have chosen this path, but I could choose where it led. I could choose to let it destroy me, or I could choose to rebuild piece by piece until I was whole again. And for the first time in weeks I felt a glimmer of hope. It was small, barely there, but it was enough to hold on to. Enough to remind me that even in the darkest moments, there's always a way forward. The days turned into weeks, and the sharp edges of my pain began to dull, replaced by a heavy, lingering ache that I carried everywhere I went. Living at my friend's place gave me the space I needed to breathe, to think, to begin piecing myself back together. She was patient with me, never pushing, always ready with a cup of tea or a word of encouragement when I needed it most. I didn't realize how much I had isolated myself over the years, how much of my identity had been tied to being his wife. Now, without him, I was left to figure out who I was on my own. The nights were the hardest. Lying in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the dark ceiling, my mind would wander to the life we had shared, the future I had imagined for us. It felt like mourning a death, except he was still alive, still out there, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if he was with her. The thought made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to push it away. I couldn't control what he did anymore, and I didn't want to. My focus had to be on me now. One day, while scrolling through my emails, I saw a message from my lawyer. The subject line was simple: next steps. My stomach flipped as I opened it, scanning the contents. She had prepared the initial draft of the divorce papers and wanted me to review them before proceeding. The sight of it, so clinical and final, made my breath catch. This was real. There was no turning back now. I scheduled a meeting with her for the following week, determined to see this through. In the meantime, I began sorting through the practicalities of unraveling a life built together. Bank accounts, shared bills, the house. It all felt overwhelming, like an insurmountable mountain I had to climb alone. But I wasn't entirely alone. My friend helped me make lists, tackling one thing at a time, reminding me that progress, no matter how small, was still progress. The house was the hardest part. I couldn't bring myself to go back, even to collect my things. Just the thought of stepping through that door, of seeing him again, made my stomach churn. Instead, I asked my friend to go with me. We picked a time I knew he'd be at work, and I steeled myself as we pulled into the driveway. The silence inside the house was deafening. It felt like walking into a stranger's home. The warmth and comfort I once felt there replaced by an eerie emptiness. I moved through the rooms methodically, packing up my clothes, my books, the little trinkets that had made the space mine. Each item felt like a relic of a life I no longer recognized, a reminder of the person I had been before everything fell apart. In the bedroom, I hesitated, my gaze falling on the framed photo of us on the nightstand. It was from our honeymoon, a candid shot of us laughing, sunburned and carefree. I picked it up, tracing the edges of the frame with my fingers. For a moment I felt a pang of longing, not for him but for the version of myself in that photo. She had been so hopeful, so full of love and trust. I set the photo down face first on the nightstand, unable to look at it any longer. As we loaded the last of my things into the car, I glanced back at the house one final time. It didn't feel like home anymore. It hadn't for a long time, I realized. And with that thought, I got into the car and drove away, leaving behind the physical remnants of a life that no longer existed. The following week, I met with my lawyer to finalize the paperwork. Sitting across from her desk, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, fear. Signing my name at the bottom of those papers felt like closing a chapter of my life, one that I hadn't been ready to end but knew I had to. "This is a fresh start," she said as I handed the papers back to her. I nodded, her words resonating, even if they didn't feel entirely true yet. Days turned into weeks and slowly I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. I started going to the gym, something I had always talked about but never found the time for. I even signed up for a cooking class, learning how to make dishes I had always relied on him to prepare. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a reminder that I was more than just someone's wife. Friends I hadn't seen in years began reaching out, offering their support. At first I was hesitant, unsure of how to let people back into my life. But their kindness was like a balm, slowly easing the loneliness I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. I started going out again: dinners, movie nights, even the occasional happy hour. It felt strange at first, like stepping into a world I had forgotten existed, but it was also freeing. One evening, as I was sorting through a box of old photos, I came across one of us from our wedding day. My breath caught as I stared at the image, the joy on our faces so genuine, so real. I didn't feel anger or sadness as I looked at it, though. Instead, I felt a quiet acceptance. That day, that love had been real. But it was also a chapter that had ended, and holding on to it would only keep me from moving forward. I placed the photo back in the box and closed the lid, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The pain was still there, a dull ache that I suspected would linger for a long time, but it no longer controlled me. I was starting to find myself again, to see a future that wasn't defined by him or what we had lost. Months later, as I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, stirring a pot of soup, I realized something. I was happy. Not the overwhelming, all-consuming happiness I used to chase, but a quiet, steady contentment. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Life after the separation wasn't a straight path to healing. It was a winding road, full of unexpected detours and moments that tested my resolve. Some days I felt strong, as though I could conquer anything. Other days I barely made it out of bed, the weight of everything pulling me back under. Grief isn't linear, I learned. It comes in waves, sometimes small ripples and other times overwhelming tsunamis. But through it all I kept moving forward, even when it felt like I was crawling. My job became my anchor. I poured myself into my work, taking on projects that challenged me and forced me to focus. My boss noticed my dedication, offering me opportunities one never would have considered before. A business trip to New York, a leadership role in a new team. It was as though the void left by my marriage had opened up space for something new, something that was entirely mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of accomplishment that wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. One evening, as I was cleaning out my inbox, an email caught my eye. It was from a former colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Saw your name in the industry newsletter," it read. Congratulations on the promotion. Let's catch up soon. I stared at the screen, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. It was a reminder that the world hadn't stopped turning, even when it felt like mine had. People still saw me, still valued me, even outside the confines of my old life. I took them up on the offer, meeting for coffee on a bright Saturday morning. The conversation flowed easily, a mix of reminiscing and catching up. It felt good to talk about something other than my divorce, to remember that there was more to me than the pain I had been carrying. By the time we said goodbye, I felt lighter, as though a small part of me had been restored. Social connections became my lifeline. I reconnected with old friends, made an effort to meet new ones, and said yes to invitations I might have once declined. A wine tasting event with coworkers, a weekend hiking trip with my friend group, even a karaoke night at a local bar, where I surprised myself by getting up to sing a song I hadn't heard in years. These moments, small and seemingly insignificant, were like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together to form a new picture of my life. But not everything was easy. There were moments when the past crept in, uninvited and unwelcome, running into mutual acquaintances who didn't know about the divorce, hearing songs that reminded me of him, seeing couples walking hand in hand, their laughter a painful echo of what I had lost. And then there were the nights when I wondered if he regretted it, if he missed me, if he ever thought about what he had thrown away. One of those nights, when the questions became too loud to ignore, I broke my rule and looked him up on social media. His profile hadn't changed much. The same profile picture. The same curated posts about his hobbies, his work, his carefully crafted image. But there, among the familiar updates, was a photo that made my heart stop. Him and Lauren standing side by side at what looked like a family gathering. Her arm was draped around his waist, her smile bright and confident. It wasn't the photo itself that hurt the most, it was the caption. New beginnings, it read. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening as 1,000 emotions flooded me. Anger, sadness, resentment. But beneath it all, a surprising sense of clarity. He had moved on, and though it stung, I realized it was exactly what I needed to see. He had chosen his path, and it wasn't mine. That chapter of my life was over, and it was time to stop looking back. The next morning I deleted his number from my phone, blocked his profile, and resolved to focus on the life I was building for myself. It wasn't about forgetting him or pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about choosing not to let it define me anymore. As the months went by, I started to notice changes in myself. I smiled more, laughed more, felt more present in the world around me. I discovered new hobbies, painting, something I hadn't done since college, yoga, which helped me find a sense of balance I hadn't realized I was missing. I even started volunteering at a local shelter, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. Each new experience was like a brick in the foundation of the life I was building, one that was entirely my own. And then one day something unexpected happened. I met someone. It wasn't planned and I wasn't looking for it. He was a friend of a friend, someone I had seen at a few gatherings but never really talked to. His name was Daniel, and he had a quiet, unassuming presence that put me at ease. We started talking one evening at a dinner party, our conversation flowing effortlessly. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people connecting over shared interests and stories. Over time our friendship deepened, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations, our laughter, the way he made me feel seen. He didn't try to fix me or rush me. He simply listened, supported, and reminded me of what it felt like to be cared for. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or a dramatic love story. It was quiet, steady, and exactly what I needed. As our relationship grew, I realized something important. My happiness didn't depend on him, just as it hadn't depended on my ex-husband. It came from within, from the life I had built and the strength I had found in myself. Daniel was a bonus, a reminder that love could exist without pain, without betrayal. But he wasn't the source of my happiness, I was. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come. The woman who once felt shattered and lost is gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The pain of what happened will always be a part of me, but it no longer controls me. I've learned to let go, to forgive, not for him but for myself. And in doing so, I've found something I never thought I would again. Peace. Peace, I've discovered, isn't a destination. It's not a single moment where everything feels perfect and whole. It's a series of small, quiet choices, choosing to forgive when the anger resurfaces, choosing to let go when the past claws at your heart, choosing to embrace the unknown instead of clinging to what once was. It's waking up in the morning and deciding again and again to live for yourself and not the ghosts of your pain. And as I've continued making those choices, day by day, I've realized just how much I've grown. The old me, the one who tied her identity to being someone's wife, is still there in some ways like a faint shadow, but she's no longer the defining part of who I am. I've become someone new, someone braver, more independent, more aware of her own worth. And it's not because of Daniel or my friends or even the therapy sessions I finally allowed myself to attend. It's because I chose to do the hard work of healing, even when it felt impossible. Daniel has been a wonderful presence in my life, but I've been careful not to lose myself in him the way I once did with my ex-husband. I don't see him as my savior or my source of happiness. He's my partner, my equal, someone who walks beside me, not in front of me or behind me. And for the first time, I understand what a healthy relationship looks like. One built on trust, respect, and mutual support. It's a quiet kind of love, one that doesn't demand or overpower, but simply exists steady and strong. There are still moments when I think about my past. Not often and not with the same sharp pain as before, but it's there like a scar that will always be a part of me. Sometimes I wonder what he's doing, whether he's happy with Lauren, whether he ever regrets what he did. But those thoughts don't linger long. They're like passing clouds in an otherwise clear sky. I've learned to acknowledge them and then let them drift away, knowing they have no power over me anymore. One evening as I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for what happened, because no one deserves to go through the kind of betrayal I did, but for what it taught me. It showed me my strength, my resilience, my ability to rebuild when everything seemed lost. It reminded me of the importance of self-worth and the necessity of boundaries. And perhaps most importantly, it taught me that life doesn't end when someone breaks your heart. It just changes, offering you the chance to create something new. I've started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it was just a way to process my emotions, to make sense of the chaos in my mind. But over time, it became something more. A passion, a creative outlet, a way to connect with others who have walked similar paths. I've shared my stories online, receiving messages from women who say my words have helped them feel less alone. It's a strange and beautiful thing, to take your pain and turn it into something that heals, not just for yourself but for others too. A few months ago, I received an email from a publishing house interested in my writing. They had seen one of my blog posts and wanted to know if I'd consider turning it into a book. The idea terrified me, putting my story out into the world for anyone to read. But it also excited me. This wasn't about him or the affair or even the divorce. It was about me, about how I found my way back to myself. And so I said yes. The book is still in progress, but every word I write feels like a step forward, a declaration that my story is mine to tell. As I sit here now typing these words, I feel a sense of closure I didn't think was possible. Not because the pain is gone, it's not, and it never will be entirely, but because I've made peace with it. It's a part of my story, yes, but it's not the whole story. There's so much more to me, to my life, to what lies ahead. I don't know what the future holds, and for the first time that doesn't scare me. It excites me. Whether I continue to build my career, travel to the places I've always dreamed of, or simply spend quiet evenings with Daniel, I know I'll be okay. More than okay. I'll thrive because I've learned that I am enough on my own just as I am. Looking back, there's one thing I would tell the woman I was when this all began. The one who sat in that bathroom clutching his phone, her world crumbling around her. I'd tell her that it's going to hurt, more than she can imagine, but she'll survive it. I'd tell her that the pain will shape her, but it won't define her. And I'd tell her that on the other side of the heartbreak, there's a version of herself waiting, stronger, wiser, and more alive than she ever thought possible. And that's a future worth fighting for. As the days unfolded into months, the rhythm of my life began to feel natural again. As if the chaos of the past had finally loosened its grip on me. I stopped marking time by the events that shattered me, and started measuring it by the moments that rebuilt me. A morning walk where the crisp air filled my lungs and reminded me I was alive. A conversation with a stranger that turned into a new friendship. Even the quiet solitude of an evening spent alone, reading or watching a film, no longer felt like loneliness. Felt like freedom. The book became a central focus in my life. Writing it was both cathartic and challenging, a way to confront my past without being consumed by it. I found myself reliving memories I hadn't thought about in years, some beautiful, some painful, all of them part of the tapestry of my life. As I typed late into the night, I realized how far I'd come, how much strength it had taken to navigate the journey I'd been on. Each chapter one completed felt like closing a door, not with anger or regret, but with gratitude for the lessons learned. One afternoon, I received an email from the publishing house. They wanted to meet in person to discuss the manuscript. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. This was no longer just a personal project. It was becoming something real, something that would soon exist outside the confines of my private world. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and as I prepared for it, I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. This was a step into uncharted territory, and while it scared me, it also reminded me of how much I had grown. When the day of the meeting arrived, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident and strong. As I walked into the sleek office building, manuscript in hand, I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I belonged here. The meeting went better than I could have hoped. The editors were enthusiastic, praising my work and offering suggestions that felt less like criticism and more like collaboration. By the time I left, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I could create something meaningful. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Edits, deadlines, meetings. It all felt surreal, like stepping into a version of my life I had never imagined. But through it all, I stayed grounded, reminding myself of why I was doing this. It wasn't for fame or recognition. It was for the woman I had been, the one who felt lost and broken, and for every other woman who might find strength in my story. Daniel was my quiet supporter through it all. He never pushed, never tried to insert himself into my journey. Instead, he cheered me on from the sidelines, offering words of encouragement when I needed them most. Our relationship grew slowly, organically, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. He wasn't trying to save me, and I wasn't looking for someone to fix me. We were simply two people choosing to walk through life together, and that made all the difference. The day the book was published was one of the most surreal of my life. Holding the finished product in my hands, seeing my name on the cover, felt like a dream. But it was real, tangible proof of everything I had overcome. The book launch was a small, intimate event, filled with friends, family, and even a few strangers who had connected with my story online. As I stood at the podium, thanking everyone for their support, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. This wasn't just a celebration of the book. It was a celebration of resilience, of healing, of the power of choosing to move forward. After the launch, I received messages from readers who shared their own stories of heartbreak and recovery. Their words touched me deeply, reminding me that we are never truly alone in our struggles. Each message was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can find the light. Life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Opportunities one never would have imagined began to present themselves. Speaking engagements, interviews, collaborations. At first, the attention felt overwhelming, but I quickly realized it wasn't about me. It was about the message, about showing others that they too could overcome the pain that threatened to consume them. And so, I embraced it not as a burden but as a gift. Through it all, I remained rooted in the present, cherishing the small moments that made life beautiful. Cooking dinner with Daniel, laughing with friends over a glass of wine, watching the seasons change from my balcony. These were the things that grounded me, that reminded me of what truly mattered. Success was wonderful, but it was the quiet, everyday joys that brought me the most peace. One evening, as Daniel and I sat on the couch, a soft rain tapping against the windows, he turned to me and said something that stayed with me. "You've come so far," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I'm so proud of you." His words brought tears to my eyes, not because I needed his validation, but because they reflected what I had come to believe about myself. I had come far. I was proud of myself. And for the first time I could say that without hesitation. Looking back on everything, I realized that the woman I had been, the one who discovered the video, who felt her world collapse, would hardly recognize the woman I had become. But I also knew that every version of myself, broken and whole, was part of the same story. A story of resilience, of growth, of finding light in the darkest of places. As I closed my eyes that night, listening to the rain, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the pain, but for the strength it had revealed in me. Life would never be perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was mine, and that was enough. Years later, as I stood in the bright light of a summer morning, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming flowers, and the world felt alive with possibilities. I was in the garden of my new home, tending to the rows of lavender I had planted myself. It had become a ritual for me, a way to ground myself, to find peace in the simple act of nurturing something and watching it grow. The past felt distant now, like a story I had read rather than lived. My life had taken on a rhythm I loved, a balance between work, love, and the quiet moments that made it all meaningful. Daniel was part of that rhythm, not as the center of my world, but as a constant presence, someone who added joy and comfort to my days. We had built a life together, one founded on trust and understanding, but I had also learned to keep space for myself. That was the greatest lesson of all, that my happiness could never depend entirely on someone else. It had to start within me. The book had become a touchstone for many. It had been translated into several languages, sparking conversations around the world about healing, resilience, and the power of moving forward. I was proud of it, not because of the success it brought, but because of the way it connected me to others. At events and signings, women and men would share their own stories with me, some tearful, some triumphant, all of them reminders of the shared humanity that binds us. I never stopped being moved by their courage. On this particular morning, as I knelt in the soil, a faint laugh echoed from inside the house. It was Daniel playing a silly game with my niece, who was visiting for the weekend. Her laughter rang out, pure and unrestrained, and it brought a smile to my face. Moments like these were what I cherished most. A home filled with warmth, a life filled with love. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Daniel joined me on the porch. We sat side by side, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange, the world bathed in a soft golden light. He reached for my hand, and I let him, his touch familiar and reassuring. "You seem lost in thought," he said, his voice gentle. "I was just thinking about how far I've come," I replied, glancing at him with a smile. "About how much has changed." He nodded, his gaze steady. "You've built something incredible," he said. "Not just this life, but yourself. You're the strongest person I know." His words warmed me, but they also reminded me of something I had come to understand. Strength isn't just about enduring pain or surviving hardship. It's about choosing to grow, to love, to open yourself to the world again, even when it feels risky. It's about finding joy in the small moments and building a life that reflects who you truly are. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. It had shaped me, yes, but it had also led me here. To a life I never could have imagined, one filled with hope, love, and possibility. I squeezed Daniel's hand, and for a while we just sat there in comfortable silence, watching the world settle into night. And in that quiet I knew I had found what I had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not a life without pain, but a life that was truly mine. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. And as I looked out at the horizon, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning.